Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from everyone attending all over the world. I have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar, which is one of a series of webinars that discusses the impacts of COVID-19 on the Arab region. My name is Nour Ghadanfar. I am an urban planner currently in Houston, Texas. I'm a 2019 Master of City Planning graduate from the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT, and I'm also an MIT Arab Alumni Association member. And the association was really established to create a connection between MIT and the Arab world and to establish a space for alumni, for faculty, for students to collaborate. Now, before I begin, I do believe it's important to acknowledge what's happening around us. All three speakers and myself are currently based in the United States, where we've been seeing the reverberations of the Black Lives Matter movement. I want to acknowledge the importance of this movement, not only for the US context, but also globally and specifically for the Arab world. The message of the movement transcends physical boundaries and speaks volumes, and I do believe it's important to listen. The Arab Alumni Association will be hosting a talk on inequality and social justice in the Arab world next week, so make sure you're following us on social media to get the details for that. Today's webinar, however, will delve into the complexities of collaboration and entrepreneurship during COVID-19, and we have a brilliant lineup of speakers to help us discuss this topic, so thank you all for joining. First, I would love to introduce Dr. Jinane Abounadi, who is the Executive Director of the MIT Sandbox Innovation Fund Program. She brings a unique combination of experiences from academic research to senior operational strategic roles in startup companies and large businesses. After completing her graduate work, she worked as a research scientist at BBN and as a postdoctoral lecturer at MIT, and advised undergraduate and graduate students. She held leadership roles in two of the most successful local Boston area startups, ITA Software and Kayak, where she gained deep knowledge about the travel technology sector. Most recently, she ran a global portfolio of third-party products for Travelport, giving her opportunity to establish partnerships with companies across the globe and to advise and evaluate a number of startups in the travel sector. Dr. Abounadi earned her PhD in electrical engineering and computer science at MIT, a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from Caltech, and a Bachelor of Arts from Bryn Mawr College. Our second speaker, we have Markus ElKatsha. He's a researcher in the City Science Group at the MIT Media Lab. He's an architect and urban planner interested in the intersection between data-driven urban analysis tools and policy strategy for rapidly expanding or urbanizing cities. Markus joined the City Science Group to work on research and deployments associated with the Cityscope platform. And prior to joining the MIT Media Lab, Markus worked for 8 years at the Boston-based architecture and urban design firm Machado and Silvetti Associates, where he worked on projects that included the Rockefeller Cultural Center in New York and the American University in Beirut. Most recently, he served for 9 years as the executive director of a public-private development corporation responsible for 2 urban expansion sites, east and west of Cairo. His current work and research is focused on new approaches to urban management and collaboration strategies for developing and emerging countries. And in addition to a Bachelor of Architecture, Markus has 2 master's degrees from MIT in city planning and in architectural history, theory, and criticism. Our final speaker is Dina Sherif, the executive director of the MIT Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship. Dina has over 20 years of international experience in integrated sustainable development, corporate sustainability management, social entrepreneurship, youth unemployment, and women's economic inclusion, among many other things. Dina holds a Master's of Public Administration and Management from the Harvard Kennedy School, an MA in Economic Development Studies from the American University in Cairo, and a BA in Political Science and International Relations, also from the American University in Cairo. Committed to building sustainable, inclusive, and diverse societies through the application of a more conscious form of capitalism, she co-founded Ahead of the Curve in 2012 to further that goal. And Ahead of the Curve is currently the leading social enterprise in the MENA region to support impact-driven entrepreneurship, in addition to creating a movement of impact investing. Dina was also the founding director of the American University in Cairo's Center for Entrepreneurship, where she also held the Willard Brown Chair for International Business based out of AUC's School of Business. She is currently a senior lecturer at MIT's Sloan School of Management and a partner in DisruptTech, Egypt's first fintech-focused venture capital fund. And so it's safe to say that our speakers today hold a long list of accomplishments, and I'm really excited to dive into our discussion. So the first question, and I'll hand it over to Markus, who I believe has a presentation for us, are what have been some of the ways MIT has adapted to COVID-19 and while still managing to create an environment of collaboration and entrepreneurship? Over to you, Markus. You're on mute, Markus. Yeah, there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, let me just share my screen here. Give me 1 second. It worked a minute. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I think it's a little blurry. So
Hello?
if you want to, there, that's perfect.
Okay. So I'll just give a brief overview of the work and research we're doing at the City Science Group, which is a research group dedicated 21st all around the world, northern and southern hemisphere, which gives us kind of a large breadth of research topics to follow up on. We have 3 lines of research in our group. One is looking at lightweight mobility systems, point-to-point mobility systems that can also be used for last mile distribution. And really it's about how as cities become denser and with more people, how are we going to move people around without congesting streets? This is a quick video showing what one of the interactions looks like, where you call this vehicle like an Uber. It comes to you autonomously, you pedal it and charge it as you're moving through the city, and then it goes off to its next patron. We're also looking at how to live large in small spaces as cities become denser and real estate prices go up. How can we start giving people more options or more more amenities within smaller spaces? This group is actually working with the likes of Google and Ori on developing deployable prototypes in Boston and other cities around the country. We're also looking at ways of leveraging large amounts of data being collected in cities to help inform policymakers, decision makers on how urban interventions are going to impact the urban ecosystem. And I'm just going to bring up a few of our collaborations. This is the Volpe site behind Kendall Square, in Kendall Square, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. MIT recently purchased this parcel for $1.2 billion. And we're looking at how to develop interactions between the various stakeholders, Matimco, the private arm of MIT's real estate holdings, the nonprofit educational institute, and the city of Cambridge. And we do this by kind of mapping large amounts of data to various sites within the parcel, and then developing kind of interaction tools that allow users to create more analytical decisions around some of the challenges they're looking at and understand what the urban performance impact will be. And we've done this in other places like Riyadh, where we're working with the city of Riyadh on the development of an innovation district around an existing university. This project is over, but it kind of shows how through very simple use of color, one can start understanding what the impact of locating housing vis-a-vis offices, vis-a-vis educational facilities could have on urban performance. And we're doing a lot of these simulations of, like looking at kind of how land use or mixed use land use groupings can impact things like mobility, as well as the spread of diseases in urban environments, and how that can also be translated to office space and simulations looking at kind of how high risk, medium risk, low risk infection scenarios can be understood through manipulating schedules or paths of migration through migration patterns of people through office space and what that will look like. And then finally, I'll just talk about what I'm working on, which is developing a project in Egypt where we've got cities like Cairo that are growing 3 or 4% a year. Cairo is one of the fastest growing cities in the world, and we're starting a collaboration with Cairo University and the Ministry of Communication on setting up kind of a city science lab at Cairo University to look at challenges around mobility, land use, and now hopefully the spread of diseases. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Markus. Jinane, I would love to hear what. Yeah, no, that was great. I would love to hear what the Sandbox Fund is doing and how it adapted to COVID-19. Jinane, you're on mute.
There we go. Nour, I just want to thank you for putting this program together, and I'm so glad to recognize actually some names and faces from my student days among the alums that are joining today. I have great memories of being part of the Arab Student Association, and it's wonderful to participate in an Arab alumni webinar. So I'd like to actually maybe take some of our alums back to thinking about their days at MIT, and I will talk about how COVID-19 kind of hit us in almost a dramatic way, just because of the timing and everything that we had going on at the time. The Sandbox Innovation Fund program is one that is focused on student entrepreneurship and on innovations coming out from directly from the work that the students do. And in that, it's kind of unique within MIT and works along a lot of other programs. But our focus is primarily on providing students with funding and resources so they can go from idea to impact. And we work collaboratively with Legatum, and we have a lot of students from the Media Lab, and some of the ideas that Markus has talked about, we see very much in the program. But going back to when the crisis started, we had our biggest event on March 5th and March 6th. And March 5th happens to be the day when MIT actually put the travel ban on, put the ban on gatherings and all of that. And so on March 5th, we had our biggest showcase event where we have about 150 people attending and about 50 companies showcasing their work. And in the midst of that event, the faculty director of Sandbox is the vice chancellor. And in the midst of the event where we had everybody coming in from all over, including people flying in from Singapore, the vice chancellor kind of says, email is coming out saying basically that, as of tomorrow, all gatherings are off and all travel is off. And it also so happens to be the next day was our funding board event. And right after our funding board, where we decide on funding startup companies, I was about to fly to Morocco to launch a sister event, a sister program at UM6P. So we had just set up a partnership whose goal was to take Sandbox and bring the same type of resources and launch them for students at UM6P, which is a university in Morocco that's funded by OCP. And that evening on March 5th, the vice chancellor in Waits tells me, okay, you're not going, you're not traveling. So we've got this partnership all, ready to go, ready to launch, and everything, all hell broke loose really that evening. And luckily our events, so the funding board events, we were able to go on with them the next day, which was a Friday. And in the midst talking about, kind of adapting, pivoting, we're just thinking, okay, how can we, in the usual MIT way, is no matter what's going on around us, we've got, a pandemic, you've got a lot of unrest, but we have to keep going. That's the MIT way. We just can't stop. So all along all of this, I think all we're thinking, all of us, is how do we keep going? How do we make sure nothing stops? How do we keep supporting our students? So from there, really what happened is the following week, all hell broke loose. All students were asked to leave campus. We were asked to leave campus. And in the process, we were all working overtime, as you all know, to figure out how do we do this so that nobody stops their work. And that was kind of our biggest concern, is how do we keep going so that absolutely nothing stops, so people keep doing the work that they need to do. And we can talk a little bit more about that, given all of the constraints, no access to lab, and so on for the people that need to build. And maybe later on in the discussion, we can talk about how some of the challenges that came about the crisis or actually became opportunities, and how in the usual MIT way, we kind of channeled kind of all our energy to figure out how to make the challenges into opportunities. We managed to launch our partner program, thanks to one of our mentors, Marwan Hassoun. Miraculously, kind of in the midst of the pandemic, we managed to get about 100 new projects funded in Morocco. We managed to actually fund about $600,000 of funding that we gave out to students, funding about 350 ideas in the midst of a pandemic. And some of those ideas, some of those students actually focused much more on problems that were very directly connected to COVID-19 problems. Others actually kind of stepped back and started rethinking and reevaluating their assumptions, thinking about this disruption. What's the world going to look like? And we can talk about a little bit later how startups are actually best positioned to be able to bring about solutions in a disruptive time compared to other well-established and existing companies. So I just wanted to share a little bit kind of some of the drama around what happened with the pandemic, given that there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of pain and a lot of hurt, but really kind of within MIT, this resilience to keep going and to not stop and just keep working is just really amazing, and we're happy to talk about some more details later on.
Yeah, that's incredible to hear. Dina, I wonder if you could follow up with that on how Legatum is currently operating, right? I'm sure in the beginning everybody was taken aback, but how have you moved forward at the center?
Well, and first of all, thank you, Nour, for organizing this and for inviting me. I feel very honored, considering that I'm the only one who isn't actually an MIT alum, but I am alum from that university down the river. So it is quite an honor. I think, I mean, just following up on what Jinane said, MIT really just doesn't stop. It's fascinating. I feel like they didn't skip a beat. In fact, in many cases, people were doing more and taking on more. I'm a very new executive director, so I took on my role in October. I didn't actually relocate to Boston until January, and then this happened. But I have to say that, for those who don't know, the Legatum Center was established to support entrepreneurship in emerging markets as a pathway to sustainable development in developing those markets. And one of our flagship programs is a student fellowship program to support students, MIT students who are developing businesses in those emerging markets. And a lot of our fellows get support from Jinane and from Sandbox. And I think COVID was a really tough transition. And I think MIT students demonstrated a huge amount of resilience and patience as everything unfolded. And for the Legatum Center, as a new executive director, there are so many new initiatives that were starting to come into force and that were being rolled out. And I think for us, shifting our student fellowship programming in terms of we have a once a week class, we immediately went virtual. I think one of for all the alum, you know this, the beauty of MIT is walking down a hallway and running into an investor or another entrepreneur or somebody from one of the big tech giants. That's the beauty of being on the MIT campus, is constantly running into all these different people and building up that network of everyone who is doing all these amazing things in entrepreneurship and innovation. I think for us at Legatum, what we were most concerned about is how do we give our fellows that same experience virtually? And so we really went out of our way to bring to the fellows in the remaining weeks before the semester ended as many people as we could into the Legatum class, and expose our fellows to as many people as we could from our external network, to kind of replace that whole the notion of running into somebody very senior from Google, or running into somebody who is an investor, or running into a serial entrepreneur. And we brought that to the classroom. And I think that was something that was very much appreciated. We had to do our demo day online. How do you do a demo day online and make it successful? So we had to also be very entrepreneurial in that, and we did that. And I think it was something that we were all very proud of, like what you're doing now. We started doing our own webinars as a way to initiate thought leadership in what is happening in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation during COVID, and what we think will happen in a post-COVID world. We really upped our game when it came to thought leadership and research. So we've really taken the opportunity to put a lot of ideas out there through our blog series. We have a number of interesting working papers that will be coming out of the Legatum Center that are addressing issues that are specifically related to COVID, such as how do we rethink capitalism in a post-COVID world? It's clearly not working the way it should. How do we rethink healthcare innovation, and what do we want healthcare innovation to look like? And what does that mean? So I think we're using the time to really think about all of the different impacts that COVID will have on varying sectors and on entrepreneurship and innovation, but specifically also what this looks like within emerging markets. So if we're thinking about MENA, these are emerging markets, and not just emerging, but in many cases growth markets, where there are a number of countries who had been on a very significant growth trajectory. And what is COVID going to do in these markets? And how do we think about entrepreneurship and innovation now within these markets? And I think these are extremely important discussions. And a few weeks back, in collaboration with the Shuman Foundation in Jordan, we organized a talk about how to think about innovation-driven ecosystems as a way to build economies bottom up in a post-COVID world. And I think that was extremely well attended as well. So Legatum Center, not just because I am Egyptian, but we are thinking about MENA as a region of focus, and finding different ways to support the Arab region through our work and through our thought leadership.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I did watch the webinar with the Shuman Foundation, wealth of knowledge. And I love how you put these, like walking down the hallway at MIT, because I do believe these serendipitous connections are what make MIT special. And recreating them online, I think, is difficult, but not impossible. And I think all three of you have shown us the different ways that MIT is adapting. And this is why it's a leading institution in the world. I want to just take a step back and kind of look at what are some of the biggest barriers or challenges that entrepreneurs have faced in the MENA region specifically before COVID-19, and how have those changed, if they have, after COVID-19? Maybe Jinane, you can take this, since you were talking about the partnership with the Moroccan University.
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk more about our partnership with the university, because I'm not as familiar with the wider MENA region as Dina or Markus are. But I think some of the challenges, as we were having conversations with UM6P about how do we replicate the same program that we have at MIT, and what elements of that program are actually will work and what elements won't work. And so in addition to the usual parameters, such as the ability of having a mature ecosystem with different types of investors, different type of money, and so on, I think there are a couple of other really important elements which have to do with the mindset of people. I think what's so unique about MIT, about the American system in general, is this idea that if you have an idea, you can actually make things happen as an individual, that you have the ability to make things happen. Even, of course, you're going to rely on a network of mentors, a network of faculty, advisors, a network of potential investors. But ultimately, as an individual, you have the ability to kind of make things happen. And I think what's so difficult in the Arab world is kind of creating that belief in people that I, as an individual, have the ability to make things happen, and I can figure out how to kind of work through the system, and people around me will also believe in me. I think the other thing that's so important about MIT is that we believe in our students. We believe in their ability to make things happen. We believe in their intellect. And so I think the other side of it is making sure that the grown-ups that are surrounding the students believe in their potential. And so then in these conversations, how do you create an environment where you actually believe in the potential of the young people, of the students? And so a lot of what we do in Sandbox is we have a very strong mentorship program where the grown-ups, the kind of older people with kind of experience, do believe in the ability of the young people to achieve. And so we're working really hard also with UM6P to create a mentorship program where we are creating kind of a collaborative mentorship program where we're using mentors from here, working alongside mentors in Morocco, and creating that culture of mentorship as a way to, mentors play a big role, which is they are your cheerleaders in many ways. So they have to believe in you, but they also hold you accountable. So, as we say about Sandbox, we're kind of a program where we want to lower the barriers. We want everybody to participate, but we also have high standards. So you kind of have to have that balance of making sure you've got people that are cheerleaders, but hold you accountable to actually getting work done. So I think besides the ecosystem, maturity of the ecosystem, the availability of capital, and so on, I'm really interested in working on the mindset, on the growth of people, both the young people and the grown-ups, so that you kind of believe in the potential of the talented young people that we have.
Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting aspect, the mentorship, which I believe we might not have as much of as we do in the global north or at MIT specifically. Dina, I guess I'll frame the question to you because of your work with entrepreneurship at AUC and your work with Ahead of the Curve. What are some of the barriers that you've seen facing Middle Eastern, North African entrepreneurs before and after COVID?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a very interesting question. I think, the barriers are, what are a lot of the barriers that exist in emerging markets in overall, which is like access to capital, access to, if you look at what you need to see an overall vibrant ecosystem, you need to have access to good universities, research and development. We don't have something comparable to an MIT in the Arab world, although we have great universities. We don't necessarily have universities that are producing this level of science and innovation on a university campus. And I think that's something that is a challenge to innovation in the region. I think there are varying levels of barriers when it comes to access to capital, but I think we've come a long way. And we've seen the birth ecosystems across the region have become, I think, more and more sophisticated. So we've seen an increasing number of venture capital funds emerge. We've seen an increasing number of accelerators, incubators, initiatives to support entrepreneurship and innovation coming from civil society. I think there are a lot of private sector initiatives that have taken place. I don't think that has, we've seen an equal increase in the number of, I would say, innovation-driven enterprises in the region. I think in terms of seeing the growth of new businesses, we have that. SMEs are increasing in number every day, but I think on the innovation side, we continue to fall behind. What does this world look like as a result of COVID? I don't think that we're going to see a huge drop in capital per se. On the contrary, actually, we've seen deals close during COVID in a number of countries. In the GCC, we've seen deals close in Egypt. We've seen them close in different sectors. We've seen the emergence of new funds. You know, Egypt, the one that I actually joined, Disrupt Tech, was launched during COVID. It may have started as an idea pre-COVID, but it was actually launched during COVID. So I don't think we're going to lose momentum. I think what we're going to see, and what I hope to see, and this is somehow related to what Jinane was saying, I hope to see, as a result of all of the gaps that have become very clear in all of our systems as a result of this pandemic. And when I say gaps in systems, I don't just mean healthcare. I think in terms of education, I think in terms of agriculture, I think in terms of logistics and transportation and e-commerce, the gaps have become very clear, and the opportunities have also become even more clear. And my hope is that we'll see a rise in innovators, people who are going to youth who will step up and will come up with business models to take advantage of these opportunities. I think this realization of human potential is a very interesting one, Jinane, and I've been thinking a lot about human agency during COVID. Just because if we think about how the pandemic has been dealt with, a lot of the responsibility has been given to every citizen to take it upon themselves to prevent this disease from spreading. And that is about agency. And I think entrepreneurship in large part is about agency. It's about a belief that you can actually make a difference, that you can start a business that can solve a problem and that you can scale it. And I think what we need to see in the Middle East is this embracing of our own agency to create our own change, and to do that through entrepreneurship, because we need the jobs and we need the wealth generation, but we need to do that in a way that's solving all of our big challenges at the same time.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point that you bring up. I do want to come back and ask Markus about the research and development capabilities and the role of institutions in that, you know, being a representative of the MIT Media Lab. How do you see that playing out in the MENA region? Because it is important. It's almost like an anchor to a lot of the innovation ecosystems and a lot of the entrepreneurship that comes out of that. Almost like, why aren't we seeing more of this? Where are we going wrong?
Right. So I'm very optimistic. I think that having worked in Egypt up until 2017, before returning to MIT to work for Kent Larson, who was a professor of mine 20 years ago, you know, I saw you know, very young people who were very energetic, and if the framework is right, are really some of the highest producing people I've ever worked with. You know, really innovative, pumped, charged, and to me it was a really, you know, I was there for the whole party, the whole Arab Spring, and I really saw this resilience and strength in people, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised. I think our work at the Media Lab, especially in our group, relies on collaborations with people, with institutions all over the world, including hopefully Cairo University moving forward. And I have been also incredibly pleasantly surprised at the receptiveness or the openness to, you know, change the way things are happening. I think that the MENA regions at this kind of, or parts of the MENA region are at this juncture where people are just saying, we've got to start moving differently. We have to change something. And, you know, MIT comes with a level of credibility on, you know, certain aspects of this. And I found a great receptiveness to that. And I'm hopeful that as institutions like MIT move out and expand their contacts throughout the world, that this idea of or this know-how and knowledge transfer can really spark, you know, transformative change in the region. Does that?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely amazing, and I love how both you and Dina and Jinane as well are so optimistic about the region about the future of the region. It's refreshing to hear, so that's great. I know I see a couple of Q&As rolling in. We will get to that at about 1:10 Eastern time, so in 5 minutes. So keep them coming, and hopefully we'll be able to talk all about them. I did also want to talk about the landscape of startup funding and how it's been affected. Obviously, not just with COVID-19, but with the change in oil prices, which is a large number of startups are funded from the Gulf region, and they've been heavily affected. How do you see startups being able to acquire funding, especially if you're early or if it's a risky idea or risky startup? Jinane?
So I'll talk about the US kind of early stage funding and what's going on. I think a lot of investors, and there's a lot written about kind of how investors are behaving. Investors have a lot of cash, they have, and they'd like to deploy it, and they're nervous, of course. I mean, the time to be very nervous. The early stage startups have an advantage for investors, I think, from experience from the 2008 crisis, in the sense that they are the ones that don't have a lot of overhead, both in terms of needing to service existing customers and all their problems and their contracts. They don't have legacy technology or solutions that they have to kind of keep maintaining. Typically, developing new products are cheaper when you're an early stage startup than when you're not. And so I think the thinking is that if there's any disruption in terms of either technology or business models, things will be different. I think there's a lot written about how education is going to inherently transform, how working is going to inherently transform now that we've discovered kind of a new way of being able to work remotely. Real estate may inherently transform, transportation, energy usage. So there's, I think, you know, there's a clear kind of belief that this is going to be disruptive in a major way, and that startups are the best positions to bring about disruptive solutions at the lowest cost. So early stage investors, I think, are there with the money, looking for people with just the right potential, and they will invest in this very early stage startups. That's kind of how I see it, and that's kind of the reading I've been seeing around. We have a group of great partners that are very seasoned investors, and that's how they see it as well. And so I think if you are an early stage startup today and are able, as we told all of our startups, to take the time to re-examine, really truly examine your assumptions about what the market will look like, because that's, the markets are going to change, you know, kind of in a big way, and be best positioned to develop something that's going to work in a new economy. I think you will find investors. You will make the case, and they will be pretty hungry to put some money into these new ideas. That's with respect to the US. I think with respect to the rest of to the Arab world in general, I don't have enough of a knowledge, I think, to tell you what's going on there. Maybe Dina is better positioned to talk about that. What I can tell you from our experience with our Morocco partnership is that just, I think, as both Markus and Dina said, that the young people on the ground are very hungry, they're very motivated. And already we've seen actually, I think something to be proud of, some solutions that have come out that are innovative, both in terms of coming up with, new cost-effective ventilators with effective manufacturing for PPEs. I think we've seen some things that will make us proud in terms of how people have been able to respond both to the COVID-19 crisis, both from a public policy perspective, but also from people on the ground really thinking about technology, science-based solutions, and that's really good to know. So.
Yeah, Dina, if you want to go ahead and speak a little bit more about the Middle East and North Africa.
Yeah, I think the Arab region, I don't know that it's that different than what I think is happening globally. I think risk capital, that early stage funding, I think we're going to see some, the Legatum Center at the start of the pandemic decided to carry out a series of talks with venture capitalists from across the world. And those talks have been extremely, it's been a private group of open discussions, and it's been very interesting. And we did write a blog about that on our website if people want to take a look at that. But I think what we're seeing is investors are, it's not that they don't have money. I think that they're going to pause and think a little bit about what their next move is, who they should invest in what sector. I'm seeing a number of things. I'm seeing investors question their previous behavior. I'm seeing them question the way valuations were done. We saw a lot of really high valuations that weren't necessarily justified across the world, right? So I think that's going to change. I think investors are going to be looking for businesses that are going to be able to grow slowly and sustainably. And those who are consuming enormous amounts of cash are going to be questioned a lot more aggressively. And I think these are all positive trends to see in this space. I don't think there will be a lack of capital. I agree with Jinane there. I do think that what we're going to see is capital shifting to different sectors. The kind of overall virtualization that we saw happen overnight is going to have huge impact on very particular sectors. I think in the Middle East in particular, we're going to see a lot of shifts within the fintech space. I think we're going to see a lot of changes within e-commerce. I think we're going to see, or my hope is that we'll see a lot of changes in education. And I think healthcare is one that will shift globally, but I think the region, our region in particular, will have its own trends. And the capital is there. And I say this all the time to startups who come to me, capital flows where there's a good idea. There's never a dearth of capital. There's oftentimes a dearth of great ideas. And I think that's what investors are really going to look for. And they want to see entrepreneurs who are agile. They want to see entrepreneurs who are realistic. And they want to see entrepreneurs who are going to start innovating for systemic change. Because if this has revealed anything to us, it has revealed that we really need systems change thinkers. We don't want to see innovations that are band-aids. We want to see innovations that are going to transform systems.
Yeah, I love that Band-Aid analogy at the end. Markus, there's a question from one of our attendees that I think you would be most apt to answer, and it's talking about how freedom of thought and movement usually is an important factor for entrepreneurship and creativity. And would the cyber communication and remote collaboration positively impact entrepreneurship in the Arab world? And I'm curious also, I guess, your experience, especially being in Egypt during the Arab Spring with censorship, and how you see what's happening now. Is it different? Has it improved?
So I think Egypt's a unique case in that there's much less control on cyber communication than there is in other parts of the Middle East. So in Egypt, I think that the adoption is very high. I mean, it has been very high of things like Zoom and Skype. But in other parts of the Middle East, there has been a lot more control on a lot of these communication technologies, and that is challenging. Working in, having worked in some of in the Emirates, it's a problem when you cannot Skype or Zoom freely, And I think that these kinds of things are going to have to be rethought, and how I was also speaking with people in dealing with communications strategies. And now that we are moving from copper cable to more data driven, how do you reassess how you charge people for bits as opposed to time along copper lines? And this is something that's being discussed right now, in Egypt very, very heavily, because they are trying to migrate communication technologies to more appropriate systems so again, I see a lot of, I'm very positive. I see a lot of these hurdles being re-looked at, and people saying, well, this is really, something we have to consider differently. Does that answer the question?
No, absolutely. I think that's a great answer. And I think it's right. Sometimes we might segment the MENA region as one, but it's so different from every country, from every experience, from every government. So I completely agree with your analogy there. There is another question from an attendee talking about if you've seen any change in the entrepreneurs' mindsets before and after COVID-19. So I think entrepreneurs just in general are a special breed, and they're always thinking outside the box. They're always trying to move. Have you noticed COVID-19 kind of bringing to the forefront more agile behavior, or has it differed, for example, in the global north versus the global south? What have the three of you seen?
I'd like.
Sorry, Marcus, go ahead. Do you want to go first?
No, please.
I'm just going to say something very briefly, and then Marcus, you can go for it. I think the Arab region is not an easy place to live, and this is coming from someone who spent the majority of my adult life living in the Middle East. It's often a struggle, and I think everyone tends to. And when I talk about the Middle East, I want to kind of leave the GCC aside slightly, because those countries have emerged and have developed very efficient systems for the functioning of how those societies function. But in countries like Egypt and Jordan and Lebanon and Morocco and Tunisia, you have to innovate on a daily basis just to exist. And in places like Libya and Syria and Yemen, where these are Palestine, conflict is the norm. And that creates, the way we exist creates a level of resilience and kind of a natural ability to come up with solutions and problem solve on the spot that doesn't exist elsewhere. And I think, that what that will allow is, it means that our entrepreneurs will also be more resilient in terms of their willingness to pivot, their willingness to be agile, and their willingness to deal with really tough circumstances in terms of cash flows, and thinking creatively about how to manage money, and thinking creatively about how to respond to COVID or plan around COVID. I think that is very different from what we'll see here, or what I have been seeing with entrepreneurs in the United States, who are really struggling with this kind of really difficult moment, because that day-to-day resilience that's built up in you doesn't necessarily exist here. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think on the other side of that is also, and I hope we touch on this at some point, but I think what is happening with women entrepreneurs during COVID is also fascinating. And I think we'll be seeing some really interesting trends come out of women-led businesses during and post-COVID that should not go unnoticed. I'll pass it on to Marcus now.
I wanted to add to that, because I was going to say very similar, in my mind, so most of the Middle East is in a post-COVID situation yet. So, I mean, Egypt is still expected to hit its kind of peak infection transmission in a few weeks. So that part of the world is still living through kind of this real situation. But what I was going to say is that yes, that day-to-day life is very entrepreneurial on almost every level, and that the resilience I've seen with collaborating partners has been really, everything from people making their own masks to finding systems to leave, hand washing stations throughout informal communities has been pretty amazing to witness. So I think that this is an opportunity for the Middle East to really show some pretty innovative solutions that have come out of how people are going to live together. The other thing that's very interesting is that the Middle East is predominantly urban, right? I mean, people live in cities, so it's urban solutions can really be I mean, the situation of public transit, the condition of public transit, marketplaces, how people are going to start dealing with day-to-day life is going to be very informative on what society looks like in 2 years from now in the Middle East. I think they're going to carry those changes through much more than we will here. Once. It'll be interesting to witness, to see. I think the jury's out. We don't know what post-COVID is going to look like yet.
And I think it's really interesting that you touch specifically on how the Middle East and North Africa is primarily urban, because we are seeing so much come out in North America about people almost being afraid of the density of the urban city, right? And trying to flee from that. But in the Middle East, there's no fleeing, right? So how do you innovate and live within that reality? Yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely love to quickly touch on something Dina said about women-led entrepreneurs, because I think that's really important before we go to our final question from the audience. So Jinane and Dina, I would love to hear your experiences with that. I think as you're both women entrepreneurs.
I'll let you go, Dina, first. Maybe talk about the Middle East, because that would be
yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jinane. It's interesting because at the very beginning when COVID happened, there were these constant articles and posts on LinkedIn and posts on social media from all these different people within the entrepreneurship ecosystem giving advice to entrepreneurs on how they can survive COVID. And it was really interesting that a ton of investors were writing. Almost all of them were male, and their advice pretty much surrounded conserve your cash, keep your teams lean, think about all of your high performing people and get rid of your worst performing people. There was like this list of things that you needed to do to survive, and all of it had to do really with the kind of bottom line. There was very little advice about how to keep your team together, about how to use empathy to rethink about your business model and come up with new products and I think for me, when I was reading all these things, I kept thinking, women have been doing that from the very beginning. That's how we manage our businesses. Being conservative with our cash has always been a way that women have led businesses, because it's always been so hard for them to raise money. They've always been at a disadvantage in terms of raising investor capital and getting, specifically in the Middle East, it's not that easy for a woman to go get a loan from a bank for varying reasons related to bank regulations and unconscious bias and so forth and so on. And a lot of the women entrepreneurs that I know were really kind of taking a moment, who are not stressing about cash flow, were really kind of taking a moment to think with their teams about how they can strategize long-term during this time of COVID. Very few of them were panicking about money. Very few that I spoke to anyway. Very few were panicking about money. Very few were panicking about who they needed to necessarily get rid of. And it was a very interesting difference from what I was seeing from other enterprises that were led by men. And I do think that COVID is going to reveal some the differences in how women lead their businesses and grow their businesses. And my hope is that that's going to be very positive, because a lot of investors will really see that they should have been betting on these women from the beginning. So I do think that we'll see a lot of interesting changes in that space from the investor side, but I also think that we're going to see an increase in the number of women-led businesses coming out of COVID, and in the tech space as well.
I absolutely love that. And I think there are parallels also to how women-led countries have reacted to the COVID-19 crisis. And specifically, I'm referring to New Zealand, that has almost like conquered the COVID-19 pandemic inside their borders. And just last week, they're putting an influx of $1.2 million specifically in arts and creative spaces, because that's where they see something that's most affected. And I think that's unique, and I absolutely agree. I love that. We have one more question, I think, and I would like to ask Jinane to see this, to respond to this. So it's saying that unemployment figures are soaring due to COVID-19, and a lot of fresh grads are entering the job market. And do you expect a surge in entrepreneurship? Just I guess from your role as the director of the Sandbox Innovation Fund, and what are the challenges of some of the employment dynamics you see there?
Yeah, so actually that's a very that's an excellent question. When the job market doesn't look so good, what do these bright students do? And actually, what we've seen, just looking, and I've just done a report for the Vice Chancellor, looking at the engagement over the summer. So our requests for the summer for people wanting to pursue entrepreneurship ideas over the summer have increased greatly, like hugely. So the number of students who, first of all, there's the job market looking at full-time positions, and there are internships. So kind of our students are either looking for a summer internship or looking for a job. And both, in some cases, the job offers or the internship offers were rescinded. So these students now have nothing. Their summers just opened up. And as the summers open up, they're like, okay, you know, Sandbox, can you support us? Now I'm going to pursue something that I'm really interested in, and I'm willing to, you know, put all my time in it. So we've gotten a huge increase from students there. So I think definitely the students will go look at entrepreneurship, kind of their own, pursuing their own ideas as a way to be productive. And I think the other thing is also the personal motivations. What we've seen is a lot of students are like, you know what, you know, that job where I'm going to do something that's not that interesting, that doesn't seem like it's making a difference in the world, where I'm just making money. Now I really want to make a difference. I want to have an impact. I want to feel that my work is meaningful. So we've seen that also in Sandbox, in people shifting from necessarily just saying, I want to build a startup, I want to make a lot of money, because that sounds really awful today, given everything that's going on, to actually, I want to do something good, I want to have an impact. And actually ties in nicely to what Dina was talking about, which is typically what you see kind of women entrepreneurs, their interest is typically in doing something that's for the social good. So that becomes usually that becomes a preference. So it's very much aligned with the objective of why do you want to do something on your own, what's motivating you. And it's not just making the money for yourself, making money for the investors. It's really to have a positive impact and making things easier, making things better, taking away some of the pain points that we're all feeling around us. And that's actually another motivator, I think, for entrepreneurship. Not just the lack of jobs out there.
Yeah, I think we need an entire other hour to discuss the benefits of social entrepreneurship and like the trend that we see now, where so many businesses are moving towards that direction and so many investors are paying attention, right? It's not just a one-way thing. But we do have 1 minute left. And I know we have some questions left unanswered. What I can try to do is I can send them to our panelists, and maybe we can post responses to them on our LinkedIn page so that all your questions are answered. I do profusely want to thank Markus, Jinane, and Dina for taking the time to speak with us today. I think it has been a wonderful discussion. I love the optimism that you've portrayed in the region. I love how you've portrayed the resilience of everybody in the region, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. So thank you all, and thank you to our participants who joined us today. Be sure to join the MIT Arab Alumni Association next week on our special webinar discussing inequality and social justice in the Arab world. So thank you. Yes.
Is there any chance we can make a final statement?
Of course, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I think I am very optimistic about the Arab region, and and I think maybe we all are, but I also think optimism is also a result of privilege. And where we sit and what we're able to see. And I just wanted to also say that there are many, many things to be concerned about when it comes to our region. And the future of jobs is on the top of that list. And over the past decade, I've seen many policymakers kind of put the onus on entrepreneurs and those in the entrepreneurship community to kind of save the day when it comes to youth unemployment. That hasn't happened, and I don't see that happening post-COVID either. And I think it's just really important to remember that entrepreneurship is important, new business growth is important, innovation is extremely important, but policy matters. And we really need good policymakers now more than ever. And we need to see multi-sectoral partnerships evolve at a much more rapid rate. We need to see government partnering with the private sector, partnering with civil society. These are things that we have not seen in our region in a very, I would say, in a good way. And I do hope that as a result of COVID, we will start embracing these things more, because there will be a job crisis, more so than what we have seen over the past decade.
Well said. Really well said. Jinane and Markus, do you have any concluding statements?
Yeah, I would like to just add to that as much as COVID has brought many challenges, it's also brought so many opportunities. You know, the Arab Student Association put together SciTech and brought people from all over collaborating together. I think those collaborations between MIT students and MIT alumni and people in the region and people here, kind of these boundaries have now kind of gone away, because there's no difference on Zoom, whether you're sitting here in Egypt or Jordan or Palestine or Morocco or the US. It all feels like everybody can work together. So I think it's an opportunity for better collaboration, whether people are working to serve the markets in the Middle East or helping entrepreneurs from the Middle East reach the markets outside. You just have to take this and learn how to use Zoom, Slack, whatever, to create more collaboration between particularly MIT and the MIT alums outside the US and the Arab world.
And please reach out to us if we can help in any way. You know, I think everyone at MIT and every MIT alum is privileged, and we should help and can help where we can.
Yeah, I see a big opportunity, so I'm hoping. And to your point, policy is very important, and we have to work on that at that level as well. But I'm very hopeful, and I think that this shock to the system is a time when we can really see real change happen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak as well.
Thank you. Thank you again, the three of you, Markus, Jinane, Dina. This has been a wonderful discussion. And yes, we will follow up with any other questions online. So follow the MIT Arab Alumni Association on LinkedIn or Facebook. Thank you to the participants. Thank you to our audience. And we'll see you next week. Thank you all.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.